There was a time in your life when you knew exactly who you were. You didn't doubt your worth. You didn't apologize for your needs. You didn't shrink to be accepted. And then life happened. You gave, you adapted, you survived, and somewhere along the way you disappeared from your own life. But listen to me, you are not broken and you are not lost forever. What you lost was connection, not value. And today is not about becoming someone new. Today is about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. At some point in your life, without even realizing it, you began to walk away from yourself. Not all at once, not in some dramatic moment where everything collapsed. It happened quietly, subtly, in moments that seemed small at the time, but added up over the years. The moment you swallowed your truth to keep the peace, the moment you said yes when every part of you was screaming no, the moment you laughed something off that actually hurt you. That's how it starts. And here's the truth most people don't want to face. You didn't lose yourself. You left yourself. Now listen to me carefully, because this isn't about blame. This isn't about beating yourself up. This is about awareness. You cannot rebuild self-love until you're willing to acknowledge the exact moments where you chose comfort over authenticity, approval over self-respect, and safety over truth. Most people stay stuck because they keep asking, why don't I love myself? When the real question is, when did I stop honoring myself? Think about it. Every human being is born connected to who they are. A child doesn't ask for permission to feel joy. A child doesn't apologize for having needs. Somewhere along the way, life starts teaching conditions. Be quieter, be nicer, don't be too much, don't rock the boat. And each time you obeyed those rules at the expense of your own truth, you traded a piece of yourself for acceptance. That's not weakness, that's survival. But survival is not the same as living. And what happens when you keep doing that? You start feeling empty, disconnected, restless. You wake up one day and think, how did I get here? Why don't I recognize myself anymore? That feeling isn't random. It's feedback. It's your inner self knocking on the door saying, you've been gone too long. Most people run from that moment. They distract themselves. They stay busy. They blame relationships, circumstances, or time. But the strongest thing you can do, the most loving thing you can do, is to pause and tell the truth. To say, yes, there were moments I abandoned myself, because ownership is power. And power is where self-love begins. You see, self-love doesn't start with affirmations. It doesn't start with confidence. It starts with courage, the courage to look back without judgment and recognize the patterns, the pattern of overgiving, the pattern of shrinking, the pattern of staying silent when your soul was screaming. Not to punish yourself, but to reclaim yourself. Here's what I want you to understand. Every time you ignored your intuition, every time you tolerated disrespect, every time you betrayed your own vow, you used to avoid conflict. You were teaching yourself a lesson, and that lesson was, I don't matter as much as everyone else. Over time, your nervous system learns that message. Your mind believes it, and your heart starts to close. But the moment you acknowledge it, something powerful happens. Awareness interrupts the pattern. Awareness breaks the spell, because you can't change what you refuse to. See, but once you see it clearly, you can never unsee it again. So ask yourself, not with guilt, not with shame, but with curiosity. Where did I stop listening to myself? When did I start needing permission to be who I am? When did I begin measuring my worth by how useful, agreeable, or invisible I could be? This is not about digging up the past to suffer. It's about understanding the cost of self-abandonment. Because every time you abandoned yourself, you paid a price. You paid it with your energy. You paid it with your joy. You paid it with your peace. And no one else can refund that cost except you. Here's the breakthrough most people miss: acknowledging self-abandonment is not a declaration of failure. It's a declaration of readiness. It means you are finally strong enough to see the truth without collapsing under it. It means you are no longer willing to lie to yourself just to stay comfortable. And once you tell the truth, something shifts inside you. Compassion replaces judgment. Understanding replaces resentment. You begin to see that you weren't broken. You were adapting. You weren't weak. You were trying to survive with the tools you had at the time. That's what, and self-love starts to feel possible again. Not because your life suddenly changes, but because your relationship with yourself does. You stop fighting who you were. You stop denying what happened. You stop pretending you didn't feel what you felt. And here's the most important part. Acknowledging where you abandoned yourself is also how you begin to return, because every moment of honesty is an act of coming home. Every truth you speak inwardly rebuilds trust. Every time you choose awareness over avoidance, you take your power back. You don't rebuild self-love by becoming someone new. You rebuild it by telling the truth about where you've been and making the decision right here and now to never leave yourself again. Once you begin to see where you've abandoned yourself, the next truth becomes impossible to ignore. Much of that abandonment came from handing your worth over to other people. You didn't just walk away from yourself. You outsourced your value. You started measuring who you are by how others responded to you, how they approved of you, how they accepted you, or how they rewarded you. And the moment your worth becomes dependent on something outside of you, you give away control over how you feel about yourself. Think about how early this pattern begins. As children, we learn quickly that approval feels like love. Praise feels like safety. Acceptance feels like belonging. So we adapt, we perform, we adjust who we are to fit what gets rewarded. And again, this isn't wrong, it's human. But what works for survival in childhood can quietly sabotage your sense of self in adulthood if you never outgrow it. Over time, approval becomes a drug, a dangerous one, because it never satisfies. For long, you get the compliment, the recognition, the validation, and for a moment you feel enough. But then it fades, and you need another hit, another sign, another person to confirm that you matter. And without realizing it, your emotional state becomes dependent on things you cannot control. Here's the trap. When your worth is tied to validation, rejection doesn't just hurt, it devastates. Criticism doesn't just sting, it shatters. Silence doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels like erasure. And that's not because you're weak, it's because you've trained your nervous system to believe that other people get to decide your value. Let me be clear with you. The world will never consistently validate you, even when you do everything right, even when you give everything you have. People are distracted, people are wounded, people are inconsistent. And if your self-love is built on their reactions, it will always feel unstable. So ask yourself honestly, how many decisions have you made not because they felt right, but because you wanted to be liked? How many times did you silence your truth because you were afraid of losing someone's approval? How often did you say, if they're happy with me, then I'm okay? That's the moment you begin to see the cost. When you chase validation, you abandon authenticity. And when you abandon authenticity, you lose self-trust. You start second-guessing your instincts. You stop listening to your inner voice. Why? You wait for permission to feel confident, worthy, or enough. And here's the paradox most people miss. The more you chase approval, the less powerful you become, because people can feel when you need them to define you, and need repels respect, not because you're unworthy, but because you're not standing in your own value. Self-love begins the moment you decide that your worth is not up for nego, that it does not rise or fall based on applause or criticism, that it is intrinsic, not earned, not given, not taken away. This doesn't mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop needing others to complete you. And this is uncomfortable at first, because when you stop seeking validation, you feel exposed. There's no external safety net, no reassurance, no guarantee that everyone will approve. But that discomfort is the doorway to freedom, because on the other side of it is sovereignty, the ability to stand in who you are without apology. You see, confidence isn't loud. It's grounded. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg to be seen. It comes from knowing deep down, I decide my worth. And when you live from that place, everything changes. You speak more honest. You choose more consciously. You stop performing and start aligning. This is where boundaries begin to form naturally. Because when you know your worth, you don't over-explain, you don't chase, you don't shrink, you don't tolerate what violates your values just to keep someone close. You'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded by approval built on betrayal of self. And yes, some people will be uncomfortable when you stop seeking their validation. Some relationships may shift, some dynamics may fall away, but what replaces them is something far more powerful, self-respect. And self-respect is the foundation of self-love. Let me tell you something that can change your life if you really hear it. The opinion you have of yourself must become louder than the opinions others have of you. Not in arrogance, but in alignment. Because when you trust yourself, you become resilient. Praise doesn't inflate you. Criticism doesn't destroy you. You remain steady. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice, a decision you make again and again, each time you choose honesty over approval, each time you validate yourself before looking outward, each time you remind yourself, I am a noog, even when no one is clapping. And that's when self-love stops being fragile. That's when it becomes unshakable, because no one can take from you what you no longer give away. The moment you stop asking the world to tell you who you are, you finally give yourself permission to be who you've always been. When you stop giving your power away to other people's opinions, something interesting, happens. The noise gets quieter. And in that quiet, there's a voice you start to hear again. Not a new voice, not something you need to create. It's the one that's been with you your entire life, the one you learned to ignore. You didn't lose that voice, you just stopped trusting. At some point, you were taught directly or indirectly that your inner knowing wasn't reliable, that you were too sensitive, too dramatic, too emotional, or not logical enough. So instead of listening inward, you started looking outward. You asked everyone else what they thought. You waited for permission. You collected opinions. And over time, the volume of your own intuition got turned down so low that you mistook silence for absence. But that voice never disappears. It waits. It waits in the moments when something feels off, but you can't explain why. It waits in the tension in your chest when you say yes, but mean no. It waits in the restlessness that shows up when you're living a life that looks right on the outside, but feels wrong on the inside. That discomfort isn't a flaw, it's guidance. Most people are afraid of stillness because stillness forces you to listen. And listening means respond. Stability. If you hear your truth clearly, you can't pretend you don't know what needs to change. So we stay busy. We fill every quiet space with noise, content, conversations, tasks, not because we're productive, but because we're avoiding ourselves. Reconnecting with yourself starts with slowing down enough to feel, not analyze, not judge, just feel. Because your body knows before your mind cat. Chaz up. Your nervous system responds to alignment and misalignment instantly. Tightness, heaviness, expansion, ease. These are messages, but if you're disconnected from yourself, you override them. You see, intuition doesn't shout, it whispers. And if you don't create space to listen, you'll miss it. That's why self-love requires solitude at times. Not loneliness, solitude, time where you're in. OT performing, explaining, or pleasing. Time where you don't need to be anything for anyone. This is where many people get uncomfortable. Because when you sit with yourself, old emotions surface. Grief, anger, sadness, longing. And instead of seeing these emotions as enemies, you must learn to see them as messengers. They're showing you where you've been disconnected, where you've been compromised, where you've been living out of alignment with who you are. And here's the shift that changes everything. Your inner voice isn't there to criticize you. It's there to guide you. But if you only listen when it screams through burnout, anxiety, or breakdown, you miss the gentle guidance that could have saved you years of struggle. Rebuilding self-love means rebuilding trust. And trust is buoy. LT through listening and responding. When you hear that quiet nudge and you honor it, even in small ways, something powerful happens. You start to feel grounded again, whole again. You begin to believe yourself. At first, it might feel awkward. You'll question whether you're making it up. You'll wonder if you're being selfish or unreasonable. That's conditioning talking. That's the old pattern. Outsourcing your truth. But the more you practice tuning in, the clearer it becomes. The voice strengthens. The signal sharpens. You don't need a dramatic life overhaul to reconnect. It starts in small moments, pausing before you respond, checking in before you commit, asking yourself, does this feel aligned with who I am now? And being brave enough to accept the answer. This is where clarity, thank you, begins. Not clarity about everything, just clarity about the next step. And that's all you ever need, because self-love isn't about controlling the future. It's about being present enough to choose what honors you now. When you reconnect with your inner voice, you stop betraying yourself unconsciously. You stop living on autopilot. You stop mistaking noise for direction. And the more you list in, the less you feel lost. Because being lost isn't about not knowing where you're going. It's about not listening to who you are. And the moment you decide to turn inward again, to trust what you feel, to honor what you know deep down, you don't just find your voice, you find your way back to yourself. As you begin to trust your inner voice again, something shifts in how you show up in the woe. RLD. You become more aware of what drains you and what fuels you. You start noticing the subtle moments where your energy leaks, not because you're weak, but because you've been available in places that cost you your sense of self. And this is where boundaries enter the conversation, not as rules, not as walls, but as a profound act of self-respect. Most people misunderstand boundaries. They. NK boundaries are about pushing people away, about becoming cold or distant. But the truth is, boundaries are about staying connected to yourself. They are the lines that protect your time, your energy, your emotional health, and ultimately your identity. Without them, you don't just get tired, you get lost. Think about how often you've said yes when your body said no, how often you've stayed low. Anger, given more, explained more, tolerated more, not because it was right, but because you didn't want to disappoint, upset, or be misunderstood. Each of those moments seems harmless on its own, but over time, they teach you something dangerous, that other people's comfort matters more than your own well-being. When you live without boundaries, you become overextended and undernourished. You hurry yourself into relationships, responsibilities, and expectations, hoping that one day someone will notice how much you're giving and finally give back. But that rarely happens. Not because people are bad, but because people take cues from what you tolerate. Here's the truth that changes everything. Every boundary you fail to set becomes a silent agreement, an agreement that your needs are optio. Now, an agreement that your limits don't matter. And when you keep making those agreements, you don't just teach others how to treat you, you teach yourself that your energy is disposable. Setting boundaries is uncomfortable at first. It goes against old survival patterns that told you love must be earned, that rest must be justified, that saying no makes you selfish. So when you begin to draw lines, guilt shows up, fear shows up, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of losing connection. But let me tell you something important. If a relationship requires you to betray yourself to maintain it, it is already costing you too much. Boundaries are not about control. They are about clarity. They communicate what you value and what you will protect. And when you start setting them, you may notice resistance. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries may push back. They may question you. They may guilt you. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It means the dynamic is changing. This is where self-love becomes visible. Not in what you say about yourself, but in what you allow. When you respect your limits, you teach others how to engage with you from a place of mutual respect rather than quiet resentment. And here's something most people don't realize. Boundaries create deeper intimacy, not less. Because when you stop overgiving, you stop building relationships on obligation. You start building them on choice, on presence, on authenticity. You show up because you want to, not because you're afraid not to. This also means learning to tolerate discomfort. Because sometimes setting a boundary doesn't feel empowering right away. It feels lonely, but loneliness rooted in self-respect is temporary. Resentment rooted in self-betrayal lasts much longer. Boundaries are how you protect the version of yourself you're rebuilding. They create space for healing, space for clarity, space for your inner voice to stay loud enough to get. Without them, even the strongest insights get drowned out by constant demands and expectations. And remember this, you don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to over-explain. A simple no is complete. A pause is valid. Distance can be necessary. The people who truly care about you will adjust. The ones who don't were attached to what you provided, not who you are. When you say, boundaries, you stop bleeding energy in 1,000 invisible ways. You begin to feel more grounded, more present, more yourself. Not because the world changed, but because you did. And as you protect your energy, you protect your identity. You stop dissolving into other people's needs. You stop losing yourself in expectations that were never yours to carry. You reclaim your time, your voice, your emotional space. Self-love is not loud, it's consistent. It shows up in the quiet decision to honor your limits even when no one is watching. And the moment you choose to protect our energy without apology, you stop surviving for others and start living for yourself. Once you begin protecting your energy and honoring your boundaries, something else rises to the surface, something many people avoid their entire lives, the memories, the choices, the versions of yourself you wish you could erase. And if you're not careful, this is where people turn self-awareness into self-punishment. They say, I should have known better. I wasted so much time. I ruined everything. But that voice is not truth. That voice is pain looking for somewhere to land. Here's what you must understand if you're ever going to rebuild self-love. You cannot hate yourself into healing. You cannot shame yourself into growth, and you cannot punish your past and expect your future to feel safe. Every version of you that existed was trying to survive with the awareness, tools, and emotional capacity you had at the time, not the capacity you have now, not the wisdom you have now, the one you had then. And judging your past self with your present awareness is one of the most unfair comparisons you will ever make. Think about who you had to become to get through certain seasons of your life. The toughness, the numbness, the people-pleasing, the emotional shutdown, the overworking, the staying when you should have left, the leaving when you were scared to stay. None of that came from weakness. It came from adaptation. It came from doing whatever you could to keep going when you didn't know another way. And yet, so many people carry guilt as if it's a moral obligation, as if suffering. G is proof of accountability. But guilt that never transforms into compassion becomes a cage. It keeps you trapped in an identity that no longer fits who you are becoming. Forgiveness is not about excusing behavior. It's about understanding context. It's about saying, I see why I did what I did without saying, I'll stay that way. It's about releasing the emotional debt you keep charging your self-interest on every single day. Ask yourself honestly, how long have you been punishing yourself for something you've already paid for? How many years have you replayed moments you can't change, as if replaying them will somehow rewrite them? That's not responsibility. That's self-abandonment in a different form. The truth is, if you knew better, you would have done better. And the fact that why or here now, reflecting, growing, questioning means you've evolved. But evolution requires closure, and closure comes from forgiveness. This is one of the hardest steps because forgiveness feels like letting yourself off the hook. But you were never meant to live on the hook. You were meant to learn. You were meant to integrate. You were meant to move forward with wisdom instead of weight. Why? Don't rebuild self-love by pretending you didn't make mistakes. You rebuild it by refusing to define yourself by them. You acknowledge the pain you cause others and yourself without chaining your identity to it. And let me be very clear. Forgiving yourself does not mean you forget the lessons. It means you stop letting the lessons turn into weapons against you. It means you carry the wisdom forward, not the wound. When you forgive yourself, something softens inside you. The inner tension eases. The constant background noise of self-criticism quiets down. You stop fighting your own reflection. You stop needing to prove that you're different now. You just live it. And this matters more than you realize because you cannot build a loving relationship with yourself on a foundation of resentment. Any relationship built on resentment eventually collapses. Even the one you have with you. Forgiveness is how you tell your nervous system the danger is over. It's how you tell your mind we survived. It's how you tell your heart you're allowed to open again. Some people think holding on to regret keeps them humble, but humility without compassion becomes cruelty. True humility says, I am human and I am still worthy of love. When you forgive yourself, you stop carrying your past into every new moment. You stop expecting punishment. You stop bracing for rejection. You become present. And presence is where self-love lives. You don't owe your past self hatred. You owe them gratitude for getting you here. And the moment you release the version of you that was just trying to survive, you make space for the version of you that is finally ready to live. After you've acknowledged where you left yourself, reclaimed your worth, listened to your inner voice, protected your energy, and forgiven who you had to become, there's one final truth that brings everything together. Self-love is not a realization you have once. It's a relationship you build every single day. And like any relationship, it lives or dies by trust. Right now, the level of trust you have with yourself is reflected in your daily actions, not your intentions, not your thoughts, your actions. Every promise you keep to yourself strengthens that trust. Every promise you break weak ends it. And most people don't struggle with self-love because they're broken. They struggle because they've stopped believing themselves. Think about it. How many times have you told yourself, I'll start tomorrow, I'll take care of myself later, I'll speak up next time, I'll rest when things slow down? Over time, your mind learns something important. Your words don't mean safety. They do. It means consistency, and without consistency, trust erodes. You don't build self-love by making grand declarations. You build it by doing small, uncomfortable, honest things repeatedly. You build it by showing up when it would be easier to disappear, by following through when no one is watching, by choosing alignment over convenience. At first, this feels subtle, almost insignificant. Drinking water when you said you would, going to bed when your body asks for rest, leaving a conversation that feels draining, telling the truth even when your voice shakes. These moments don't look heroic, but they are revolutionary, because every time you honor yourself in a small way, your nervous system receives a new message: I can rely on me. And that message changes everything. It changes how safe you feel in your own body. It changes how confident you feel making decisions. It changes how you respond to uncertainty. This is how confidence is actually built, not through hype, not through pretending, but through evidence. Evidence that you do what you say, evidence that your needs matter, evidence that you will protect yourself. And here's the part most people miss. Self-discipline is not self-punishment. It's self-respect. It's choosing what serves your future self, even when your present self wants comfort. It's saying, I love myself enough to stay consistent. That doesn't mean perfection. You will fall off. You will miss days. You will have moments where you default to old patterns. What matters is not that you fail. It's that you return, that you repair, that you recommit instead of quitting on yourself. Every time you come back, you reinforce trust. You tell yourself, I don't abandon me anymore. And that identity shift is powerful, because once you see yourself as someone who shows up, you naturally make better choices. Not out of pressure, out of alignment. This daily practice also creates momentum. When you keep small promises, you begin to believe in your ability to keep bigger ones. You stop doubting yourself. You stop waiting for motivation. You move because you're anchored in integrity. And as trust builds, self-talk changes. The inner critic loses authority. Doubt quiets down. You become more resilient, not because life gets easier, but because you trust yourself to handle what comes. This is where self-love becomes embodied. It's no longer a concept, it's how you live. It shows up in how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake, and how quickly you recover instead of spiraling. In how willing you are to choose growth over comfort. You begin to realize that the life you want isn't built through intensity. It's built through consistency, through daily acts of alignment that stack over time. And one day you wake up and notice something different. You feel steady, grounded, at home in yourself. Not because everything is perfect, but because you trust the person you're always with. Self-love isn't found. It's earned through presence, honesty, and follow through. And the moment you decide to keep your word to yourself, you become someone you can finally count on.